Good morning. For me, it is a great honor to introduce to you Mr. Richard Bourdain, professor of research at Harvard University. He is a very prestigious economist, and in his recent work, he has two that are relevant for this conversation. One that has to do with the use of conversation. They created a model for schools to take advantage of evidence and statistics available in the system. And the most recent one has to do with a conversation of inequity. This is a subject matter that has been included in most of the presentations. And we have to remember the challenges that we face regarding conditions on which people start their career, differences on availability of resources in families can have an impact in opportunities that people can have inside or outside the educational system. These are the two main subjects that would open this presentation. Richard, he is the model professor. He is a professor that if you know him, you will admire him because he can materialize the idealistic dream of a professor. I had to attend his class very early, otherwise I had to be listening to the class in the hallway. And this is my confession. Sometimes I had to take his class on the hallway because I was late. Richard, thank you so much. And now you have the floor, so you can start with your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sergio. I'm going to try and do something a little bit different, which is to engage you in talking with each other and then in sharing with the group what you've talked about. I'm going to do this at 3 different times. I'll say more about that when we get to the first time. My talk has several parts. First, to show how increases in family income inequality have taken place, and also to point out that family income inequality, which is very high by OECD standards, is even higher in Mexico. And then talk about why has family income inequality increased? And that's the first time I'm going to ask you to talk with someone next to you about whether the patterns in your country are similar to those that I will tell you about in the US. Third, talk about how growing inequality in income among families has resulted in a reduction in opportunities for children from low-income families to prosper. And that's a serious problem because it means we perpetuate from one generation to the other income inequality. And fourth, to ask, well, what are the mechanisms through which increased family income inequality translates into inequality in educational outcomes for youth? And then finally, talk a bit about what can we as citizens do about this. And I'm going to show you a brief 6-minute video of an early childhood education program, and then ask you to talk with someone next to you, what we tend to call peer sharing, and then talk about what you've talked with the group about what you've talked about. In particular, what did you find interesting in the video? And to what extent does it have relevance to early childhood education in your country. So that's my plan, and the reason I'm going to try to engage you is really to facilitate all of our lifelong learning. That is, opportunities to learn from each other, because that's a key piece of the challenge we all face. We all recognize that we have to continue to learn because the world around us is changing. This is part of what I'm talking about is a large project that has kind of consumed my professional life for the last 10 years and produced these 2 books. The book on the left is 600 pages long and has 25 chapters by many different researchers. The book on the left is 145 pages long with big print, which is a much easier book to understand. So, increases in family income inequality. What you see if you look in the United States at economic growth and family income is that from the period marking the end of World War II up until the mid-1970s, economic growth was sometimes called a rising tide that lifted all boats. There were, of course, some people earned more than others, but both manufacturing workers, service workers, construction workers all found their incomes growing. This stopped in the early 1970s, and we've seen increasing inequality in what people earn. And if you take the right side of that graph and expand it out, this is what you see. So basically you see people who are in the 95th percentile, that's the blue line on top. 95th percentile means that 95% of families in the country earn less and 5% earn more. We can see they've done very, very well. At the bottom, the 10th percentile families have not made any economic progress at all. This is net of inflation. Now, of course, why did this happen? A big reason it happened is changes in labor markets. And basically what you see is that it's always been the case that educational attainments have played an important role in determining how much people can earn in labor markets. That's not a surprise. But what is a surprise is that the size of those gaps, the amount more, for example, that university graduates earn over secondary graduates, has increased enormously over the last half century. And that's true both for males, which are on the left, and for females on the right. So why did that happen? Well, it happened to a large extent because of technical change and globalization. Has changed the mix of tasks that workers do. And you can see that here. So these are changes in the mix of jobs that American workers did. And what you see is there's a decline in jobs where you simply did the same thing over and over again. Example is filing. There used to be very large numbers of people who worked in the back offices of banks and insurance companies, mostly female high school graduates who simply filed all day. That, as you know, is now increasingly computerized. For males, it was manufacturing jobs, installing left front tires on Ford cars, 8 hours a day. Those jobs have either have been automated or sent to countries that have lower wages. The jobs that have increased in number are jobs that require, when we say high math skills, basically those are the kind of cognitive skills that are tested on the kind of tests that Mexican students take and American students take, and that's true. And I think there are tests in most Latin American countries as well as in the United States. High social skills are also important. Why are social skills important? And I'm going to talk in a minute and give you a chance to talk about what we mean by social skills. These are interactions among people. The reason they're increasingly important is that computers aren't good at that. And the good jobs for people are the jobs that computers are not good at doing. So what are examples of jobs that have high social and high math skills? All the jobs that you do would be examples of that. Managers, researchers, teachers. Now, what's interesting is, when you look at these kind of jobs, these require traditional cognitive skills, but not much interactive skills. They are declining in importance. Why? Because as neural nets have become faster and more highly developed, increasingly computers can be programmed to do a variety of tasks that human beings used to do that required significant cognitive skills. An example would be what in civil legal suits is called like discovery. I don't know quite what the word is in Spanish. Basically, in civil suits, lawyers would spend hours and hours going through tens of thousands of pages of documents to try and find information relevant to a case. That, to a very large extent, has been automated. So one consequence is simply teaching our children the kind of cognitive skills that are measured on tests and not teaching them these social skills is not preparing them to thrive in a changing economy. Now, what do we mean by social skills? And they would include oral and communication skills. And being able to do this in more than one language is increasingly important. My inability to give this talk in Spanish is an indication of my lack of communication skills. The ability to work productively in diverse teams. The ability to contribute and tackle new challenges. Again, that's, some people relish a new challenge. That's a disposition, a mode of looking at how you spend your day. That's critical to lifelong learning. Wanting to learn new things, thinking that is exciting to do. That's a way of looking at the world that's increasingly important. And of course, knowing how to learn from other people efficiently is critically important. The world is changing so fast, and none of us can learn by ourselves everything we need to know. Now, here is my first time I'm going to ask you to talk with somebody nearby for 3 minutes. And then I'm going to ask for volunteers to speak to the group. And we have 2 people with microphones who will go around. And so we ask you to speak into a microphone. It's fine to speak in either language, Spanish or English. We have these wonderful simultaneous translators, and I've been very impressed by their skill, and I will put my earphones on. So we will ask, and I will say this again, but we'll ask you to give your name and where you're from, or perhaps what you do, your role. So the questions I would like you to ask here, we'll talk about for 3 or 4 minutes with someone nearby. First of all, with the list of social skills, everyone has a different list, but in terms of what your experience in your country, with the list of social skills that are important for all children to master and continue to develop, would they be different in your country than the particular list that I have presented? What would you add to my list? And second, what are the obstacles in the settings in which you work, perhaps in your country, in enabling all children to master these social skills? So 2 questions, and I'm gonna set my watch. So let's spend 4 minutes talking to someone next to you, then I'll ask for volunteers about the answers in your setting to either or both of those 2 questions. Okay. Please begin. Okay, could I ask you to reassemble? Among elementary school children, primary school children, classrooms in the United States, this is a symbol for quiet. Okay, thank you. So we have 2 members of the Crefal staff have microphones. So if you would like to speak, please wait for a microphone. And again, speaking in either language, Spanish is fine. I have my earphones. And so we'd love to hear from a few of you. How about the first of this? Would the list of social skills be different in your country? Who would like to say? So this gentleman in the front, thank you for starting us off. Again, please say who you are and where you work.
Okay. I'm Germán Escorza. I'm an advisor of Crefal for this session of 2050. And it's just an idea, not exactly an answer. We were thinking with Eugenia that we are moving from the information and knowledge society towards a creativity and imagination society. So one skill that we would like to promote for the future is more creativity and imagination. So maybe something not only for a different country, but for the whole list.
Thank you. So promoting imagination, creativity. Okay, we have a second. Again, would you say who you are?
Por favor. I am Carmen Campero from the Pedagogical University in Mexico City. We think that other social skills should be caring for others, tolerance and respect. We think that those social skills are of the utmost importance, and solidarity. Solidarity, that would be another social skill to be promoted.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much. First of all, for speaking in Spanish, which is setting the tone appropriately. And second, I firmly agree with what you said, and the next time I give a talk, I will have added those to my list. One more on the first one.
Guadalupe Quijano Garcia from Lysenko, which is the Higher Education Institute of Colima. One is problem resolution and debate skills, because when we have these problems and all these crises, it is indispensable to have skills that will help you deal with everyday life situations, both privately and in your interactions with society at large. On the other hand, we would think about a global citizenship and a very engaged citizenship. We need to create a system of in which people can propose things and can make proactive, critical, and reflective contributions. So that means that we need to have a culture of information, a culture that is observant, and a culture that requires accountability. How much is gained and how much is lost in the different development environments in the context of the 17 SDGs.
Thank you. Could I ask you to turn to the second question? What are the obstacles to enabling all children to master these skills in the particular country in which you live or work or in the work setting? Why is this so hard? And particularly as we expand this list, as you have very nicely done, why is it so hard to have all children master these skills? Have someone else speak here. One back here, thank you for starting.
I am Pilar. I am a student at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and I would say that one of the hindrances is the competence system in Mexico, because you are hindered from seeing the other as your peer, but they'd rather feature anybody else as your competitor. So we're not used to working in teams or to cooperate with each other or to feel empathy with each other. I think that individualism is something that is a hindrance as well. I would also say that sometimes technologies are withdrawing us away from reality and are actually impeding us from interacting with people. Otra aportación, por favor. We think that sometimes the low educational skills or the low educational level of the adults who work with children become a hindrance for children to learn anything else. So sometimes they are being brought up by their aunts and uncles or grandparents, and also the authoritarianism within the school or within the family, which don't allow them to express freely or to participate freely.
So there are cultural challenges. What about what happens in schools in your country? Again, some of you are not from Mexico, Sergio has told me. Does the instruction in school help to all children to learn these skills in the settings in which you are familiar? Do we have someone to speak? Would you like to speak? So we need a microphone. This woman in the front? The second row here.
In our educational system, we work in authoritarian style. And in the adult education program, we try to implement communication skills and collaborative work skills, but it is a huge challenge because the people who work with us in the community are or have been educated in an authoritarian way. So it is very difficult to have them work in favor of the competencies or the skills that we want to develop, because we don't find any support either in the community or in the context where we are trying to implement them. I am Agustin Mercado, and I am a student at the National Pedagogical University, and I believe that our educational system is like a double standard system, because they teach you how to be very authoritarian. You're educated under a very authoritarian system during your basic years of education, and then when you grow up, they want you to be part of a team. And I think that is not right. And after the education by skills was implemented, there has been a high dropout rate, and also drug dealing has increased. I think this education by skills or education by competences does not allow you to be empathetic. You think that your classmate is your competitor and not your peer. And we are just hindering development because you are told that you have to excel, that you have to be the best, and you have to do what it takes to be the best. And that makes you be very individualistic. And I think that as a country, that has led us to detriment and to failure, because the system is not effective, it is not being regulated, and we cannot, and we're not empathetic to children, because it is like talking to a child alone, like saying like you can do it and you can do it and we don't care about the rest. That is a very failed que estas habilidades surjan en todos los niños. Víctor Xochitl Nava from the Institute for Education Evaluation. So in addition to what has been said, I think that there are two constructs that we have been used in a failing manner: organizational commitment and leadership. Sometimes customary our customs and of our indigenous peoples are not easy to implement. So we have to sometimes organizational commitments are maintained because there are hierarchies within communities, and we would rather have to change to a flat organizational fashion, because otherwise there will not be an opportunity for a better organization and participation scheme if we are to maintain that vertical structure instead of a horizontal one. I am Apolinaria Arzu from Honduras. So far, presentations in this conference have taught me that lifelong learning means that I will be conveying knowledge to children. Well, children are the first level of society. They reflect what is going on in their households. So we have to think of the communities where we live. We see that there is a sort of competition from the beginning of the day. Early morning, parents work individually. So they go out to work and they don't even talk to neighbors. It's only about competing against each other. And if then we go to school and you see teachers and students and their position in the classroom. So you see teachers standing in the front and children sitting down. So there is not a role where people will talk to each other, exchange information. And so when you are thinking about developing these skills in children, we should rather be thinking, what are the skills that teachers should have to be able to educate children for their future role in society? When we think in lifelong education, we have to stop, take a step back, and reflect upon what are we going to give to the younger generations, and how are we going to convey what we intend to teach the younger generations. We have to stop and then change and make the adjustments to what we need to do as young and children educators.
Thank you. I think that's, these are terrific, you've made a terrific set of comments. I think particularly the last comment is relevant. Something I think you all would agree with is that what we tell children matters much more than how we model for children. How we behave is what our children pay attention to a good deal more than what we say. And so when we think about schools, if we want children to learn these schools, we need schools to be places where the adults are able to engage in these behaviors with each other. And a lot of our schools are not organized for the adults to be able to learn from each other in effective ways. And notice, these are not, I would argue, these are not new skills to add to a curriculum. In most countries, the curriculums are already very large. These are not new skills. These have to do with how you teach. But this is a challenge for a great many teachers who themselves were taught in a way where the teacher talked and the children listened. To be able to have the teacher as facilitator, helping children to work in groups to solve math problems, to develop science experiments, is a very different type of teaching. It requires adult learning on the part of teachers. We need to think about, are our schools set up to facilitate that kind of learning on the part of the adults? Are they set up for the adults to be able to model for children how you learn from each other? And if not, why not? And I think you've had a number of comments about the organization of families, of communities, of societies. I think we need to think about these things, because if we want children to master these skills and disposition, we adults need to model how to do that. So let me move on a little bit. I thank you very much for your participation. When I was talking with Sergio about the design of this session, I was a little worried about your engagement. Sergio told me I did not need to worry. And of course, he was right. So let me move on, and we'll have two more opportunities for you to talk to your colleagues and contribute. So one other reason that we have this growing inequality of family incomes in the United States is, unfortunately, a growing percentage of American children are growing up in homes with only one parent. And that's particularly true of children whose parents don't have a lot of education. So if you think, going back here, if you have two parents who have gone to the university, they're going to have this vastly higher income than a single parent who did not even complete secondary school. So these demographic changes in the United States have had quite troubling impacts on family income inequality. So how does family income inequality, and again, it's very large in Mexico, even a little bit larger than it is in the United States. And I think that's true in many other Latin American countries as well. How does that affect opportunities for children from low-income families? And that's where I want to turn next. So here you see, in fact, unfortunately, gaps in educational outcomes between children from low-income families and those from higher-income families in the United States have grown. So the two numbers on the left here, these reflect the percentage of children who were teenagers in the mid-1970s. These are teenagers whose family incomes are in the bottom quarter of family incomes in the United States. These are children whose family incomes were in the top quarter in the United States. And we see very big gaps. Only 5% of children from low-income families who were teenagers in the mid-1970s earned a 4-year college degree by the age of 25. In contrast, 36% did so. Now roll the clock further, and these are children who were teenagers in the mid-1990s. And we see that among children who were teenagers in the mid-1990s whose family incomes were in the bottom quarter, there has been an improvement, but only a very modest improvement. 9% of them got a 4-year college degree by the time they were 25. In contrast, the percentage of children from higher income families that got a 4-year college degree is now more than half. And again, remembering this graph that we saw of how important educational attainments are to family incomes, we see that in fact we get growth and inequality. So the inequality that we see in today's generation is being passed on to the next generation, which is a deep threat, I believe, to the pluralistic democracies in which we live. Now, why does this happen? Why is it that inequality in family incomes, large as it is, translates into very great inequality in educational attainments for children? Well, there are at least 3 mechanisms. One is how much money families spend on their children. The second is where families live. And the third is whom children go to school with. Let me show you just a few numbers here. Then I'm going to ask you, in the countries in which you live, in the communities in which you live, is the pattern similar or is the pattern different? What these numbers are, what these lines are, these are the amount of money per child that families these are families in the bottom 20% of family incomes in the United States. These are families in the top 20% in the United States. How much they spend per year per child. And this is all net of inflation. These are all expressed in 2008 prices. So what you see is that, of course, in the early 1970s, there was a gap. Affluent families spent more on their children than did low-income families. Not a surprise. But look what happened over the next 30-plus years. Net of inflation, those gaps grew enormously. The increase here, that gap was about $2,700 in 2008 dollars. Here, that gap is about $7,500. So what do they spend the money on? They spend the money on high-quality childcare. They spend the money on summer camps, on private schools, on internships, on vacations to other countries, on opportunities to learn other languages, all kinds of things that help children to acquire these social skills. So this is one mechanism through which family income inequality contributes to inequality in educational outcomes for children. In other words, that break down, that hinder this idea of equal opportunity for all. The second is where families live. Increasingly, families that have a lot of money move to neighborhoods in which housing is very expensive, so consequently their neighbors have a lot of money. And on the other hand, children from low-income families, their families need to live in communities in which housing prices are relatively low, so consequently their neighbors are poor families. So then, does neighborhood matter? This is a long-standing debate among sociologists in the United States. And there's quite path-breaking research that was done in the last 20 years in the United States. This is work in which This is work in which the United States conducted, the federal government conducted an experiment in which they asked families that lived in public housing. These are very low-income families that lived in public housing in 5 large cities. And they asked them if they would like to participate in an experiment. So it was a coin flip. And if the family said yes, they'd like to participate, there was a coin flip. And if they lost the coin flip, they stayed right where they are. They continued to get subsidized public housing. But if they won the coin flip, they were able to move. They were given a subsidy, substantial subsidy, to move to private housing with the condition they had to move to a neighborhood that had a very low poverty rate. So then the question, and those families were followed for almost 20 years. And they followed, and so the children grew up. And so because they did a coin flip, the families that lost the coin flip were demographically very similar. Almost all families of color that lived in big cities. And the question then is, how did their children fare if they won the coin flip, moved to better neighborhoods? And the answer is, it mattered a whole lot, as long as the children were less than 13 years of age when their family moved. Those whose children were less than 13 years of age when they moved, this is the earnings of their children. And their children, by the time they were age 28, were earning almost $3,000 a year more than the children of the same age who lost the coin flip. So the point is, neighborhoods really matter. Who you grow up with really matters. But it's critical that the families are in better neighborhoods when their children are very young. And finally, the last mechanism, so we've got increases in spending on enrichment, we've got increasing residential segregation, and we see that matters here. And then finally, we've got increasing school segregation. Not a surprise. I think in all of our countries, most children go to school close to where they live. And consequently, if neighborhoods are increasingly segregated by income, so are schools. And children who attend schools, who attend public schools, in which most of their classmates are poor, don't fare nearly as well. One reason why, a kind of peer group effects. It's very hard to have high ambition when no one you know, no one you go to school with has a parent who has a middle-class job. Student mobility effects. Students tend to leave and change schools frequently. Why? Because their families lose housing. And third, work in these schools is very, very difficult. So it's very hard to attract and retain skilled teachers. And there's good evidence on the importance of all these things. So again, these are the mechanisms. Increasing gaps in enrichment, increasing residential segregation, and increasing public school segregation by income. So those are the mechanisms through which increasing family income inequality translates into inequality in life chances for the next generation, for children. So now, this is the second time I'd like to ask you to speak with someone nearby and basically ask, are the patterns similar or different in your country? So would you take 3 minutes and say, is it different in your country than what we described here? Or are there other mechanisms? So let's talk about that for 3 minutes, please. Could I ask for volunteers to comment on this? It would be... It sounds as if you're having better conversations without me. Okay, could we ask for volunteers for comments and questions? Love to hear, first of all, from people who did not speak the first time. Would you care to add a comment here in the front? Thank you. Start us off. With a microphone, please. Say who you are and where you're from, please.
Si le das un momento, por favor, para que Carolina Mendoza from Crefal. I would like to add another factor that could explain the difference in results in Mexico, besides the one that you already mentioned, specifically in the higher medium education system, we have segregation for institutional diversification. Institutions are very different. It's not the same when you study in a remote school than when you attend a technological high school or to a technical school. Sometimes inside the schools there are other systems of segregation. If you go to the morning shift rather than in a night shift, these are factors that result in inequities. Mira, qué interesante e importante tu comentario. Aquí en la parte de atrás, de verde, hasta atrás, hasta atrás. Adelante. Can you hear me? Here we were talking about the situation in Chile. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I want to talk about the educational system in Chile. That it's the most segmented one. As in other countries in Latin America, we are talking about a differentiated society. So these mechanisms are being reproduced as well in Chile. And we also have another issue. Maybe we could have social skills inside the school, but for specific social levels. There are no interrelationship in different levels of the society. So we have a lot of segmentation in schools. We don't have social integration that can result in the difference in society as well. Here they were talking about Germany as well. I am Ilse Bruna and I work at Crefal, but I am from Germany. In Germany, there are exactly the same conditions that you were mentioning. For example, children of academic parents attend to university. Oftentimes, children of workers don't go to college because sometimes there is a difference between children that are capable to study. When they are 10 years old, the school will make the decision if you are good to go to college or not. Team Barbabosa. Viva Mexico. We are going to wait for the train. I think that in Mexico, we have exactly the same segregation by social levels, and they are dramatically marked and increasingly higher. The gap is getting wider and wider as time goes by, and as new technologies emerge that are used and maximized better because they define better resources, opposed to those that are in a higher level. In Mexico, the National University is prone to narrow these gaps. However, it is not done 100% because since the very early stages, there is a dramatic difference and we have higher segregation. Atrás, por favor. Usted adelante y después la persona de atrás. Ricardo Zúñiga. I am a student at the CENES in Morelia. Yo, along to all these issues in Mexico, there is another reason, another cause. Stemming out from the segregation, there is another type of segregation that generates margination and risk. Disenfranchised population live in areas that are in danger. They live in slides and slumps areas, and it can be added to the other two reasons. And there is another type of segregation, mainly in higher education arenas, because companies or employers prefer to hire students graduated from private colleges. Gracias. Gabriela Rodriguez from Crefal. In cities, there is a situation that has to do with working places for mothers and fathers. So children have to attend schools nearby their offices. So a kid coming from an poor area and it's going to attend up to a better school because their parents live there. This happens in urban areas. Children can attend to a full-time school, and in a public school they would have better conditions because they have an extra hour to study Spanish, computing, mathematics, because they have an extended schedule. And this situation is going to prevail if the kid is going to live in an area with better conditions because it's going to live nearby offices depending on the place where their parents work. And they can have access to extracurricular activities, not necessarily in the school. They can attend to personal classes, music classes, because the mother will let them there while they finish their shift. So in the cities, kids can attend schools nearby their offices of their parents. Gracias. Un último comentario. ¿Por acá? O dos por acá. Y después pasaremos a un tema un poco más optimista. Patty Magaina. I am the student of the National Pedagogical College. We were discussing here and we reached a conclusion. Definitely, the money invested in education in Mexico is very low. This factor results in the fact that the gap in educational levels is going to be very wide in Mexico. In order for you to have a good education, you need to pay for that. We need to attend private colleges like La Salle, El Tecnológico, and we don't have enough resources to do that. Oftentimes they offer grants, but at the end of your studies, you have to pay back. And we attend public colleges, we have good professors, but not always. And unfortunately, this is not going to give us a competitive edge, because as the person in the back was mentioning, in companies they prefer to hire people that are graduating from private schools. And yesterday there was a manifestation and demonstration because people were protesting because they don't hire people stemming out from the public university.
So as we've seen, while the constitutions of probably all of our countries guarantee equal opportunities to thrive and potential for upward mobility, there are just lots of forces that hinder that, and in which groups with power are able to maintain their advantages. So there are clearly enormous challenges to bringing about upward mobility. And I think upward mobility is really particularly important. And by that I mean, a child may grow up in a low-income family, but if that child works hard, his or her children will not grow up in a low-income family. That's what we mean by upward mobility. I think upward mobility is incredibly important. In the United States, I believe it's the glue that holds our very diverse society together. And when that upward mobility is diminished, it's an enormous threat to the stability of our democracies. I frankly think the election results in the United States and in Britain and in France, and I don't know the situation in Mexico, are to a large extent the result of a lot of individuals feeling deeply threatened. They see the world passing them by, they don't see opportunities for them or their children to thrive. Okay, so what do we do about this? Clearly, these societies face just enormous challenges. And there's no simple solution. There's no one thing that any country can do that's going to alter this, for sure. However, though, one piece of a comprehensive challenge to make equality of opportunity and upward mobility more of a reality is to give kids a strong start. And one thing we know is, so much of development takes place in the early years of life. So, and for children who grow up in distressed circumstances, they often don't have good nutrition or good health, and those can be lifelong handicaps. So good early childhood programs, by no means are they sufficient, but they can be really very helpful. And my colleague and I wrote these books together. We sought to find educational initiatives in the United States that had the goal of improving life chances for children from low-income families. And these were programs that had been well evaluated, had some durability. They weren't just available for 1 year and then disappeared, and that did make a difference. And we wrote about those in our second book. And we also had the resources from a foundation to have the public television station make 6-minute videos of these effective programs. And I'd like to show you one of those 6-minute videos. And then ask you to talk about what you see. Do they resonate at all with possibilities in your countries? So this is an early quality, high quality early childhood program. It happens to take place in Boston, where I work. But it's been well evaluated. And so, what does it look like? A high quality program for 4-year-olds. And this school, which is located, is in one of the most challenging, crime-ridden parts of Boston. As you'll see, virtually all the children are children of color. As you'll see, they're absolutely beautiful children. And this program has made a difference. I'd like you to particularly pay attention to what the professional development looks like for the adults. For example, this is a conference about lifelong learning. And one of the disturbing facts of professional development for teachers in the United States is that most of it doesn't work. And a lot of money is spent, and it doesn't have much change on what teachers actually do in their classrooms with children. This is an exception. So look at the coaching that goes on and see, could this happen in your settings? Do you find it interesting? What appeals to you about what you see? If you don't like it, what does not appeal to you? So after the 6-minute video, I'm going to ask you again to talk with someone near you, and then we'll spend some time talking about that. So if we could turn, now those in the back may want to move up, as you can see these beautiful children, and look at the video. And this will be a challenge for our terrific simultaneous translators, but I'm sure they will do well. So I hope here is our video. Can we turn off these lights, maybe? Can't do it. Okay, that's right.
Mather is the first public elementary school in North America, founded in 1639 in Boston.
Good morning, Mather. Today is Tuesday.
We are over 600 children.
Good morning to the sunshine.
I teach a group of 20 4- and 5-year-olds.
About 30% are Vietnamese, 25% Cape Verdean,
Hispanic, African American.
Haitian, Jamaican, some Caucasian.
Good morning. Jackie, do you want to do the calendar?
This is considered a pretty high trauma location.
Good job.
A little over 80% qualify for free and reduced lunch. About 20% of our children qualify for special education services.
The notion that the public schools would provide a universal preschool program is sort of new in this country. Traditionally, public schools really start in kindergarten through 12th grade. There's a fair amount of research at looking at the interaction between the quality of preschool and long-term outcomes. And basically, it's the investment in high-quality preschool that made a difference. You need a strong curriculum. Strong math and literacy, thematic content is critical. I really think content matters.
I want you to get ready for story bits so we can see. The Little Red Hen Makes a Pizza. The Little Red Hen Makes a Pizza is a fantastic text for children. Does anybody have a pizza pan? It allows for a lot of exploration into many math skills, science skills, and literacy skills. You have to start with the dough. She put her flour into a big mixing bowl. She stir with me. It's very interactive. There is real pizza dough on the table for you to play with and see what it feels like and see what kind of pizza you might be able to make. And it allows for a lot of activities.
It's really clear to me that kids' work is really play.
And some tea.
It is through play that they're learning all kinds of different things.
This one's cool.
This one's cool. Yeah, it is a little cooler than this one, right? Why don't you go on this side, Jack? There you go.
I think about the role of the teacher all the time.
Deanna, what did you notice?
There's a heart on it.
The role is to be engaged and present. It is to build relationship with kids, listen to the kids, observe the kids, be ready to ask just the right question in the right moment. It's about being a reflective practitioner.
So this is the big castle in your house? In the house, and that's why it's built.
Coaching plays a critical role in supporting teachers to really think reflectively about their practice.
Raise a quiet hand if you would like to say what you saw in Rameka's work.
I love it.
By observing them, gathering notes, noticing the practice that they're doing well and things that they're struggling with, and giving them feedback on this process that they're really able to reflect. I think that there's a lot of materials here that reaffirms what you're doing, and also some places where you can really stretch and go deeper with some of the things that you're facilitating with the kids.
You have to think about what are the supports and structures that help you support teachers. We use something called the National Association for the Education of Young Children accreditation system. That is a pretty comprehensive approach to looking at what good early care and education quality should look like. We have 80 schools that we have access to and teachers, and we can do professional development in a much more quality way.
Do you feel like you're using lots of different variety of responses and approaches? When you're mentoring, you're actually using criteria from NAYC that's very in-depth.
We hire community-based coaches. The coach really is there to help facilitate the teacher's thinking, and we do 2-hour trainings once a month with teachers.
All right, who remembers something that we've read from the Salmon book?
Like Billy.
So when we sit in a group, how does it work if you want to say something?
The hand-raising strategy that you're using is to remind them because
Right.
they're very excited to share ideas.
It's not that effective though.
Okay.
If you all talk at once, I cannot hear you. I cannot understand you.
Something else that you could do that I observed in another classroom, a teacher used a visual. She had just a little picture of a person raising their hand, and kids notice it and they immediately respond or raise their hand. We can really have a huge impact on what's going to happen for kids later on.
They were very bright. Yes. Even the youngest ones.
Eyes are watching, ears are listening.
Finally, early childhood is being recognized, and people understand that this is a critical point in childhood development. And so we should be accountable. I think that's great.
We go back to the. Okay. Thank you. So I'd like again to spend 3 or 4 minutes talking with a neighbor about, what did you find interesting? Are there lessons here that might be relevant to pre-K education in? I apologize. Thank you. So let me start again. So I'd like you to spend 3 or 4 minutes talking again to someone near you about, what did you find interesting? Does the pre-K programs that you're familiar with, if you have that familiarity, look like this? If not, what is different? Are there things here that you might be relevant to improving pre-K programs in your setting? If you don't like what you saw, why did you not like it? So spend 3 or 4 minutes talking about that, please. To reconvene. So once again, I would like people to comment on what they saw, what they found interesting, what might be relevant to pre-K in your setting. Again, I'd love to hear from people who haven't spoken yet at the beginning. And again, please start by saying who you are. Someone who hasn't spoken yet? Over here, please. Thank you. To start.
Nilsa Lune from Paraguay. In Paraguay, we have a different reality because pre-K care is not universal yet. We have a lot of kids in early childhood living in indigenous communities. So it's very difficult to compare our reality with what we have seen in this school because they have a lot of equipment. We have a teacher with a lot of experience. Currently, we have teachers graduated and that are specialists, but we don't have enough of them to fulfill our needs and the demand. We saw that this is a very integrating system. We have an inclusive system. In Paraguay, we have schools that are open in those communities for indigenous people, and we have indigenous teachers. It would be very good to be very inclusive, to provide them with materials. It would be better if we would have more equipment. We have a high population unattended, but currently we have voluntaries, we have funds to address the needs of this sector. It is nice to see that they have the support of a coach. In the video, we notice that they are supported by a coach, someone that is observing, monitoring their work, and later on they can receive feedback on how to improve. It's a completely different reality than the one that we have in Paraguay. Le agradezco mucho su comentario.
How difficult situation is in many communities and the challenges that they face. So the gentleman in the back had a comment. You started? Yes.
Since 1900, we have seen that context was relevant. There was a Russian researcher that was called the Mozart of psychology, stated that there are many factors that are final, so your childhood is going to be your fate.
In our educational models, we have been evaluating quantitative aspects. And from what I saw in the video is that teachers carry out lots of tasks that cannot be measured with objective tools. For example, safety of children or confidence of children becomes very important so that they can develop into healthy adults. It is in the first childhood that you actually, or in early childhood, that you develop confidence for later tasks in life. So if you have a supportive teacher who knows and understands that you're coming for a traumatic context, that you come from a family that is going through financial hardship. I mean, poverty is not only poverty in terms of money, it's also poverty in terms of culture, and it brings about problems like alcoholism and drug addiction and other things. So the teacher becomes a sort of a protector, a protecting figure. So the school must be a link between joy and reality, and that link is a teacher. But many of the evaluation models that we have now kind of withdraw that warm-heartedness from the teachers. And in our schools, we see classrooms with more than 30 children. In secondary school, forget it. A teacher will never know the name of all his students in a class. So I think that we should just stop and go back to a more humane approach to education, and forget about objective evaluation, because we have to build on that premise that what you live in the childhood becomes your fate.
Would anyone, so that's a really interesting comment. Would anyone care to comment on the last speaker, either to say, yes, I agree, or I have a somewhat different perspective? It's a very provocative, really interesting statement. Anyone like to speak directly to that last comment? So, do we have someone who wants? Well, we will come back to you, sir. Anyone want to speak directly to this last comment? Okay, go ahead, please.
Pues yo creo que referente a lo que dice el señor, tenemos una falla muy
I think that we have a big failed system because we have implemented programs that are not followed through or are not followed up. In Mexico, we have programs that seek to help children but fail at it. I see that the program that was featured in the video has a goal, and because they want to bring the children out of their circumstance, they are given a better context. But in Mexico, while we have a justification for the program, then again they don't have they're not carried through, and we are not applying them correctly.
So let me just make one response. So I don't disagree with what you said. I do worry. You emphasize it should be humane. Absolutely. I think as one of the speakers in the video commented, they've worked very hard on developing a curriculum that does teach a variety of cognitive skills. But as someone else in the video commented, the work of 4-year-olds is play. And when done well, if you notice this making the teacher's story, how do we make a pizza? So, and then the children played with the pizza dough and there were pictures. Well, that was all in the part of kind of reinforcing lessons about shapes, about colors. So it's not easy to do. It's very difficult to do. And it's very difficult to have children at many different activity centers. Of course, first you have to have activity centers, as the woman from Paraguay pointed out, in many settings you don't have that. But even when you have in poorly run pre-K centers, you find the children are not given opportunities to play at the activity centers because, of course, 4-year-olds create a lot of mess. And it takes, one of the things they do in this particular program, the first 6 weeks are spent teaching children particular routines of behavior. And that's particularly important because a lot of these children come from very low income families with one parent. Many of them don't speak English at home. And so there are lots of challenges about behavior. And that's just not taken for granted. They work very hard in the first 6 weeks to develop, to have all children understand this is the way you behave in a particular setting. If you want to go to an activity center and there's already 3 children at that center, you wait until the child leaves. All those things are tough for 4-year-olds to learn. They're tough for teachers to learn to teach, but with enough support, it can be done. But it is difficult. So we had someone here, sir. You wanted to, yes, thank you.
I come from the Intercultural Indigenous University of Michoacan. It is a university at an indigenous area. in our state. I come from an indigenous university in our state, and many of them are from different indigenous peoples communities. Some of our students have many educational shortages, and when they come to university, they are very bad readers, and that is very grave situation for university student. Some of them have problems in speaking and talking. Many of them have confidence problems, and they have some personal shortages for university education that they have been carrying with them since they were students. Some of my students do not speak indigenous languages. Some of them are speakers of indigenous languages, and some of them have a very scant understanding of Spanish. So it is very difficult for them to speak in Spanish because they have grown up with grandparents who talk to them in indigenous languages. So that is something that is a complication for pre-grad education, because this is something that they have not corrected in lower education or in. El último comentario, uno acá y otro acá. Hello, I am Karina Analda. I work in the Ministry of Education in Mexico City, and maybe I will be inaccurate, but I know that there was a program developed for early childhood education. So we became acquainted with the program, and what I learned about the people who implemented it is that it is very similar to the video that we just watched. But we also learned that the largest challenge to implementation was the resistance from parents. That is, maybe here we are very conscious and very aware of education, but parents are not aware and are not conscious of how important and how necessary these programs are in early childhood. They're just worried about where to drop their children so they can go out of work. So they do not find that there is any need for professionalization of teachers or to have a school that would offer other type of learning through playing. So parents or families have no conscience of that. In Mexico City, children go to child care centers or daycare centers that are around communities, that are around large communities. For example, they are around the markets, or they are around hospitals or locations where working mothers are there. So you'll have 2 or 3 mothers who are the caretakers of the children of the other mothers who go out to work. So these caretaking mothers or caregiving mothers are not prepared or are not educated as educators. And then why would they care about training those mothers who are in charge of those daycare centers? I dare to say that in general, the families are not aware of lifelong learning. They're not conscious of the fact that education at age 0 to 4 is also education. Lo dijo muy bien, yo no puedo agregarle nada. Es una declaración muy contundente en donde es importante ayudar a los padres a entender lo que significa este cambio de educación. I am Jaime Rodriguez Ramos, and I was involved in the binational Mexico-U.S. program for kindergarten. I worked at the French camp in Spectrum, California, and I find that there are many similarities with this Boston district school. My colleague here is an elementary school teacher, and we find that the teachers are very professional in that kindergarten. And I saw that happen in French camp. So they work as a teacher in teacher teams. I was a preschool teacher, and I found myself rejected by Latino population because they told me, well, I come from Guatemala, I come from Mexico, and they rejected me. But it was more the Anglo parents who accepted me as a teacher. So I find that in Boston there is some linguistic identity and there is respect for diversity. I ended up being a professor in Auckland or a teacher in Auckland with students who wanted to learn Spanish. But that is reality. North America has a very sound, the United States has a very sound educational system where cognitive skills are truly appreciated. And I find that there is a good and sound sense of identity. In Mexico, we still have many things to develop. There is a sort of divorce between basic education and secondary education and tertiary education and extracurricular education. It would seem that we are different silos and we don't work together. I was a founder of the child care unit for parentless children, and in Geneva they have a very clear educational model, but it was very troublesome to implement the project because they thought that this program was completely out of their scope. But we had a lot of support from Switzerland to develop educator mother programs. So I believe that in Latin America and the Caribbean, we need to strengthen programs such as the one featured in your video in the Boston District School, so that we can build synergy between parents, teachers, and students. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all your comments. Clearly, change is difficult in any setting, and convincing parents that the importance of this is difficult. One thing is we have learned a lot, kind of the research community, about what good early childhood education looks like. So in some sense, we know how to do it. And another point why change is difficult anywhere, but it may be easier with younger children than with earlier children because the children are not the problem. The children love to do these activities. The challenge is the adults. So unfortunately, I've got two last slides, but I thank you for your terrifically interesting and informative comments. I've surely learned from them. So again, my takeaway lessons is these changes in the economy have made increasingly important kinds of skills that were not so important 40 years ago. Increasing income inequality has made it more difficult for children from low-income families to acquire these skills. There are many mechanisms. I had 3, you added others, through which income inequality translates into inequality in life chances for children. Increasing opportunities both inside and outside school for children growing up in low-income families really, I think, needs to be a high priority for all of our countries. I think the future of our democracies will really depend on that. So if you wanted the pre-K video and two others, one is of an elementary school, one is of a high school that serves low-income children. They're all available at that particular website. They're free. We'd love to have you use them. That's my email address. In conclusion, I want to thank our simultaneous translators, who I think really did a fabulous job. And thank you all.